Good afternoon. This is Panic Consulting's ArcGIS workshop, and I'm Frank Conkling. Welcome to everybody who's here live and everyone who's going to be watching it on YouTube later. Today, we're going to go and look at something a little bit different. We've got a lot of clients that have implemented Parcel Fabric, and there's always this concern about how do you handle the text for dimensions and what traditionally would have been handled with annotation. And we're going to look at that a little bit further. Before we start, I just want to go over again and remind everybody who we are. We are, in fact, Panic Consulting, and we offer all sorts of services. Please go and visit our website, panicconsulting.com. And on here, you'll see a lot about us, what we believe. If you're looking for what events are coming up, we have an events page, which has a calendar on here and actually goes and lists everything that we have. Right now, the workshops, it's probably month by month, so we don't schedule them out beyond a month. But also, if you're looking for another way of looking at those, you can look at our events and workshops or events and workshops page, which actually has a listing of a more linear listing of what events are coming up. And then once they are complete, you'll actually see a link in which you can actually go in and review what we've got here, where we've been, and any recordings that are available for you to download. In addition, we have a Panic Consulting YouTube page, and on the page we have all of the recordings that of the workshops that we've done for the last couple of years. If you want to go through and see them, there's about 65 recordings now. Each of them, they average anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour and a half, and it's free training out there. Some of them are actually very popular. Matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why we decided to go and look at this and readdress this one issue here. Let me go and go back here. So let's talk about annotation. All right. One of the things about annotation is there is an issue with ArcGIS Pro annotation. And the first issue is that, in fact, there's been a structural change within ArcGIS Pro annotation to allow us to do additional things with Anno. And that structural change means that, in fact, if you upgrade your annotation to ArcGIS Pro level annotation, it can no longer be read in ArcMap in the older technologies. And so you want to be aware of that before you go and upgrade. By the way, that upgrade happens in place, which means it replaces your old structure with the new structure. So please make sure you either make a copy of your Anno or you have a backup somewhere so that you can go and go back to it. There is no way, by the way, to downgrade your Anno. So right now, just make sure you have a copy of it before you go through and upgrade it. That's the first issue, is one in which ArcMap clients, the older technologies clients, can't read the new ArcGIS Pro annotation. But for us right now, and the reason why we're looking at this solution is that there's another issue. The ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, the new technology, the new solution for going and editing and maintaining your parcels, if it's in a multi-user environment where you have multiple editors working against it, it's actually served out and published using web services. And those web services can serve out annotation. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can use branch versioning on it, but you can serve out annotation. And when you edit that annotation, which is being served out on web services, it is considered slow. And the reason being, the annotation on web services is extremely chatty. There's a lot of communication going on back and forth, but to find this initial annotation, to have it displayed and selected, then to go and edit, make any changes on it, it's extremely chatty. So that those clients that we've had that have implemented enterprise solutions to the parcel fabric have asked us to find an alternative, find a solution to allow them to continue to have this same functionality, but do it without annotation. So what we're going to do is look at this alternatives and what we've done here. So the first thing I want to do is just sort of show you an option here. And again, want to make sure that we understand that in fact, by far the best solution is to utilize labels. Labels inside of ArcGIS Pro is much more efficient. Now you've got an option to go and use just line labels, and that's what comes with the parcel fabric, and that allows you to go and establish and use the recorded information that's recorded against those lines for those dimensions on here. However, a lot of our clients' data doesn't necessarily reflect what the deeded or recorded information is for these lines. They basically were mapping lines that may have been inversed, and the actual COGO values calculated, but they really don't reflect them. So while you can go and take and replace those values on here, often our clients instead would have pieces of annotation stored, and that annotation would reflect what those original deeded dimensions are. So I'm going to go and look at this now and show you that right now, this is annotation that has been converted into point labels, and this is the old line, the information that's stored on the line. And you can see there's a difference between the two. I'm going to turn off the labels just so you can see which one is actually the valid information on here. And the annotation would be, again, just pieces of a text that's stored in your data frame, and it's supposed to reflect what's on there. It's one of those things that anyone who knows me knows that when we're creating data sets, I like for that data set to be as efficient as possible and store the information on a feature, not just what I commonly refer to as dumb, stupid text, just pieces of text. That's the way we used to do it 40 years ago with CAD. And I think there's better ways to do that now. So what we've done is we've taken their existing pieces of annotation and converted them into points, and then utilize the labeling functions on these points to go and enable us to go and create what is similar to the annotation on a data frame, but isn't exactly, because it doesn't use that same functionality. It uses a much more efficient labeling routine on there. So the solution that we're proposing is that you take your annotation and you migrate it into points, into a point feature class. All right. That point feature class would then utilize a labeling expression to go and generate that same type of text. But you have the benefit of utilizing all the power of the ArcGIS label engine now, which is Maplex and some other components in there, so that you can set things such as scale dependency. When you zoom in and out, you can set arcade labeling expressions on there to allow you to also go and change the size and the font of those texts. And then finally, in order to go and update these, we're also proposing that we use attribute rules on here. So let's go and look at, right now, by the way, this is all contained within this cartography group. And here's our annotation points. And as you can see here, I'm going to open up this attribute table. And this is in fact, and this is real data that I'm working with. They've got 657,000 pieces of annotation in here. And let's go ahead and get to some place where we can see some real values on here. And you can see there's all sorts of text in here, all sorts of dimensions in here, on here. But when we migrate that annotation feature class over, what we do is we strip it down to two elements that we really are concerned with. One is the text string. That text string provides us with that text that's to be shown on the label. And then secondly is the angle attribute field as part of that annotation. That angle field goes and defines how that text is rotated and where it fits in there. All right, so what we can do now is we can show you the labeling properties of this annotation feature class or point feature class. And again, literally, it's just take whatever that string value is that's stored in the text strings and utilize that to go and create that label. The other thing is the placement on here. We're telling it that, in fact, to use as the rotation field, the values that are stored in the angle attribute on here. So just sort of to go and demonstrate this, I'm going to go and turn on editing. By the way, thank you, Chris. If you have any questions or any comments on what we're doing, please put it in the chat window. Chris is here. He's moderating a chat window, and he'll go and forward any of that to me and respond to anything we have here. So on here, let's go ahead and show you how this works. So if I go and place a point in here, all right, and that point, actually, I can tell it, I can tell it what that text is. And then you can see here the rotation of this on here. And this rotation, by the way, is a rotation that, let's go ahead and draw this, recognize that the rotation field is actually calculated not from the bearings, but actually is calculated from, it's a radian calculation, which goes from due east and is an angular rotation from east towards north. So it's not a normal type of bearing as we would think of, not a north azimuth, not a south azimuth. It's thought of more of it's from due east and then in a counterclockwise direction. All right. So this is just normal on here. If I go to create another piece of Anno, I could create another piece of Anno here, but let's also say this time that the angle is 0 degrees and put it in here at 0 degrees.
Frank, we do have a question in the chat.
Go ahead.
How can you convert an annotation feature class to a point feature class?
Janine, this is a good question. It's actually, there is a geoprocessing tool called feature to point. Feature to point, what it does is it will take any feature class, any line feature class, any polygon feature class, or any annotation feature class, and take that annotation and convert it into a point. So all the attribution will be stored on that point feature class. And you can tell it, for example, if it's a polygon, whether or not that point that's generated should be inside the polygon or outside the polygon. For example, if you have multi-part polygons, it might wind up that that point that's being generated is outside the polygon. But this inside component mostly is to go and help you to make sure that it's inside the polygon. So to bring this help up, it basically is, it can take any type of feature in here, and a new field with the original feature ID is added to the attribution on here, and it will go and generate a new point feature class. And this licensing option is available on all levels of ArcGIS, both ArcMap and Pro. So it really just goes and takes, and anywhere where you have an insertion point for the annotation, it creates a point for your points. Simple enough. That's all it is just feature to point is the geoprocessing tool that you want to use. And it will just go and create it and bring over all the annotation. Now we go and we strip all the annotation except for the texturing and the angle field out of the annotation so that we can utilize it here and it doesn't carry a lot of extra attribution on it. The standard type of attribution for an annotation contains fonts and offsets and all sorts of things. But this is just, we only want that text right now to go and do that. So again, this is just show you there's a normal type of annotation that's on here. We can go and create this and work it. So the question is, well, how do we use this as it relates to parcels? How do we use this for dimensions within parcels? And what we'll do, and I'll show you this here, let's go and take this and delete. Let's delete that one piece of Anno in here. Oh, all right, and let's create a parcel. All right, and I'm going to do this. I might as well go and create a record here. And let the record just go and be a date stamp on here. There's my record. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create lines. You know what? Let me go and use the traverse tool here. And I'll go and create tax parcel lines. And I'll start them here. And I'll go 45 degrees north. 45 degrees north for 200 feet. All right, and then I'll go 90 degrees with deflection from there for 200 feet. And 90 degrees deflection for 200 feet. And finally back 90 degrees deflection for 200 feet. All right, so I have now created, I've got a closed polygon here, and I can tell it to go and create my seeds on here, and it will create a seed, and I can tell it to build. It will build a polygon. Now, the critical element on here is that we now have lines that have been attributed, not just with COGO values on them. And let's get off of here, but also, let's look at this a little bit more. Also, they have additional attribution on them. All right, we don't need the points. Here's our lines. And each of these lines, all right, each of these lines has a bearing on it and a distance on it. In addition, when we're working within the parcel fabric, we have a COGO type field, which defines whether or not we actually entered the information or whether it was computed, and I hate to say computed, whether it was inversed from geometry. This is what a lot of our clients have, is they have inversed values on there, or whether or not it was previously entered, but has been split or divided or modified in some way through a clip or something like that, so that we have this third option called computed. Now, what that computed option means is that it was originally entered. So it is a record information or deed information on here, but that it has been affected or impacted by some other operation. But you could still rely upon that because it was calculated from that original deed information. It's not reflective necessarily of the shape length. So as long as we have COCO values on here, we now can start using these values. And again, let's just go in and let's turn on our labels again so we can see these. By the way, let's take our labels and have it turn on. Let's turn off our distance field and turn on direction and distance so we can see that it has the bearings and the distances on them and what it's storing on here. So that shows us really we have lines that have attributes on them. They're things that we can utilize. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a series of points that goes and actually captures the value associated with these lines, captures those values. And how we're going to do that is by creating attribute rules. And these are calculation attribute rules on here. Come on. And I say this every time, I probably should use a smaller data set, but I always tend to use real data. All right, so on here, we have an attribute rule that's called capture distance. This capture distance is set up so that it's going to populate the text string field. It's going to pull that value out of here. And if we look at the actual code, the actual arcade code that's running in here, this is a standard arcade intersect in which we're setting up first a variable called buffer, which is just going to buffer this line. It's going to tell us how far away from the line we can be and have it still capture that string value on here. Then we're going to do and we're going to create an intersect with a feature set by name. And we're going to look at the tax lines. That's the actual name of the feature class for the lines that we just created. And we're going to capture the values that's stored in distance and the value that's stored in arc length. Now, the reason why we do it in distance and arc length is that the way it works is that if it's a straight line, we want to know what that distance is. But if it's a curve, for the label, we want to put the arc length on here, not the overall distance between the two, or what would be the chord length on here. So we're going to capture both of those within that buffer area and then figure out how many of them we've intersected. We want to make sure we only do one. All right, we're going to initialize the buffer called expr, and if it's equal to 1, we didn't capture anything, so go ahead and jump out of here. But else, if it is 1, what we're going to do is we're going to go and capture the value, but we have a conditional statement here. This is called IIF, and it's an arcade expression that says, if this value that you're testing is valid, if it's true, use the first option. If it's not true, use the second option. So in this case, the test that we have is empty. If the arc length field doesn't have a value in it, it's considered a straight line. Therefore, if this is true, and if it's empty, use the distance field. It's a straight line. If there's something in the arc length, use the arc length field instead. Then what we're doing is we're going and rounding it to 2 decimal places and putting a 1 foot delimiter at the end of it. Simple enough. We could expand this to say, well, this is a deed information or whatever, but this is simple enough. It's a simple arcade expression that's being run, and we're telling it to do it when we insert the point, not when we modify the point, when we insert it. All right. So if we go back here and look at this and actually go to create a new Anno point, all right, we can be within a certain distance, and it will go and automatically capture the COGO distance field that's associated with that line. And again, if we look at the attribution, it captured the distance field and it captured the angle. And we're going to look at that angle attribute field soon here in a minute, but it captured that. So then now we can go over here and say, okay, well, this one too, capture that one, and this one, and this one. All right. So one of the things you'll notice is that sometimes the angle is the opposite of what we intuitively think it would be. If we had captured that on the outside of the line, for example, if we had gone here, it would seem logical. But since we put it on the inside, maybe it's not the way we want to see it. So on any of these lines, this value can actually be, we can inverse this and turn it upside down so that this might be minus 45. Let me see. 45 in here. I'm going to have to look at this. I think on this rule we've got, we may have something that says it has to get redone each time. So, but yeah, you can go in and make this different. So let's look at this attribute rule for the capture the rotation on here. All right. And it will look very much like the other one in that we set up a buffer, we intersect the lines, but this time what we're doing is we're capturing the value that's stored in the direction field. All right, the direction, last time we did the distance field and the arc length. This time we're doing the direction field. And we're just going through and we're setting a default of 0 in this case. And then what we're doing is we're taking that and dividing it or subtracting it from 90. All right. And if in fact there's no direction in here, it's 90. Otherwise, it's going to be the value of the direction field. And let's go down here and see that I have update on here as another chosen. We want to make sure that we set that so that's not update. Let's save our previous edits. Let's save this thing again. All right. Let's wait for this to apply. So what we're finding here is that we can actually have this set up so that we can go in here and capture the values, modify them once we create them. And we'll explain some of the benefits to this once we're done with this. While I'm waiting for this to save, I don't see anything in the chat window. Does anybody have any comments or any questions right now?
Nothing's coming in.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back here and let's capture these. And we just want to make sure that we have these points in here. So I should be able to go in here and change this to minus 45. And when I subtract 180 from it, that actually goes and will flip, and you'll look at it, this one here, it will flip the actual angle on here back and forth, so that that label is reflective and using that angle attribute to go and figure out how to go and place it. So this allows you to go and create points that capture the values that are stored in that line. What happens if I want to go and modify this and say, maybe if it's more than just that distance that I want to show on there, I want to go and modify this quote annotation to read something other than what's stored in that value. Because I have it set to only go and work when you create the point, it's going to allow you to go and set whatever you want on here, including, I can go in here and say, again, these are pieces of text. You can have them do anything you want with them. But the real intrinsic value is the first time you create them, you want to capture as much as you can that original COGO value, and you want it to capture the angle, so you can automatically set the angle on it. So what happens when we have a parcel that has a curve on it? All right, so let's go and create another tax line here. Let's time this time, and we're going to go 45 degrees due north, 150 feet here. And let's start out by making sure that we're putting tax lines on here. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go and put a curve in here. And we're going to tell it that this curve is tangent to the previous one. That's why I put that symbol in there above the 8. I'm going to tell it a 0 distance because I want to go and input the radius. In this case, I'm going to give it a 50-foot radius to the right, and I want 90 degrees on here. So it's now 90 degrees in here. I'll note now my bearing coming out, 45 degrees, and I can make that 150 feet. All right, and let's go and continue 200 feet. And let's go 90 and 200 feet again to close this out. All right. So if I turn on my labeling again, you will see there's my labels to show you what's actually stored in here. All right. So I'm now going to go and create some Anno points. I'm going to create Anno points, right? Here, 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 and here. All right. So each time I did that, it went and took the direction or bearing that was stored and used that to calculate what the angle should be. And it took the COGO values off. So what happens when I go to a curve? If I go to a curve and do that, it actually goes and captures not the chord distance on here, which is actually something different. It's not actually stored within the line. But if it's a curve, it stores the direction. That direction is actually the bearing from the point of curvature to the end of curvature, or what we commonly would call the chord bearing. That's actually what's stored in the direction field. And then the radius is stored, and then the arc length is stored. And in order to go and when we look at the attribute rule that's actually capturing the direction, what it's doing is it's taking that chord bearing and using that, so that if we create a piece of text using these rules, piece of Anno for this, it's actually going to use the chord bearing for it. No matter where I select here on here, it's always going to be the chord bearing that it's going to use on here. Let's go back here and create another Anno point on here just to reflect that, and a point over here just to reflect that. So again, you can see it's always going to use that chord bearing for that. Now, if I don't want that, I could always go and do something like, I could make this -45 degrees. Nope, wrong way. Let's go 45 degrees this way. I can always go in and calculate what value I might want in here. Unfortunately, with this current iteration, you can't sit on it and say, well, rotate it around this way. So it's more of, okay, maybe I want 40 instead, and tweaking this, maybe it's 38 instead at this point. So you could always go and tweak that, but it allows you to modify it at the end on here. One more thing I'd like to do, let's go ahead and save this and go back to this here. One of the things I'd like to do is in the capture distance, where it's actually capturing the Kogo field, instead of just going and putting the value in here, if in fact it's an arc length, I might want it to go and put something else in here. All right, I might want it to go and use an L or something like that in here. So Chris has a question, says, are you able to use the rotation tool to change the angle instead of manually typing it in? If this was a line, I could. However, this is a point, and there is no rotate tool, no rotate property on a point, only on a line and a polygon on here. That's an interesting question, though. I'm assuming you can't. But if I have a point selected, let's make sure I have a point selected, not a polygon. If I have a point selected here and I go to my modify, do I actually have rotate value in here? I do. So how do I rotate it? Nope, that's going to rotate the actual feature. It's not actually going to store something inside the angle field on here, so that no, you won't necessarily be able to go and do that. It's an interesting request, though, to be able to go and do that. So let's talk about, this is a really good option here to go and not have dumb, stupid pieces of text on your map. And it allows you to go and use web services without having to go and publish annotation on here and be much faster. You can set the attribution on the label, and let's go in and play around with this a little bit more. So if I go to my label information here, I can actually go and create a new feature class. Right now I have, excuse me, let's get on my Anno. All right, here, I right now have this one class. I can go and create a new class on here, going to labels, create a new label class, and I can call this feed information. All right, And on that deed information, I can go and set a SQL expression where if the Cocoa type, sorry, it won't be in here. Sorry, can't do it. Nope, I was thinking about something. Tori, work at any annotation, not just dimensions. Correct, Tori. You can work with any annotation at all. Most of the annotation that you're going to be doing are basically just insertion points, things like lot labels, things like tax parcel labels, but you could set it up so that you might angle some labels on there, something like that, using the rotation option on side labels inside of a point. But you're correct. It can be used for anything. Matter of fact, I've got a client that which I'm going to be doing that very quickly. They're going to be using these point solutions for dimensions, but they're also going to be putting subdivision names in and lot information and block information and such in here. And then any thoughts about annotation class and how to make them work with these solutions? In fact, again, my overall thought is that we've been dragging around annotation, i.e. dumb, stupid pieces of text, since CAD, for some of us for 40 years. It's time we let them go. If you're only doing maps, they're fine. But if we're actually trying to transition into sort of putting together real land record information, it might be time for us to let go of annotation and make sure that everything inside of our feature class works the way it should. So that does bring up a very important point here. It's something I haven't talked about yet. Thank you, Tori, for going into this. Well, what happens if we want instead to have some cartographic element to this? So for example, let me go and take care of these lines, get rid of this line in here, and delete that piece of annotation. And instead, or that pieces of labeling, point labeling. And instead, do something like, okay, let's create that, but now let's go and move this. All right, let's move this here out to here. And let's put a leader there so that we can have something to allow us to identify where it is, because maybe it doesn't fit on that feature. Well, it turns out that what we have is this Carto line feature class that allows us to do things that are purely cartographic, such as maybe we can put, and I'm not looking which the original one is, maybe we can just put a node in here and say this goes from here to there. All right, so that there is purely a line feature class that goes and shows us where that thing is for it. So you can still have feature classes, for example, cartographic line feature class for things such as arrowheads or dimensions or things of that sort. We can set it up so that this line feature class, this leader feature class, actually has an arrowhead at the end of it and works well without it. And it's still something that's still part of our data set. All right, so yes, we can do this with this combination of line or points for our labeling, and then cartographic lines to go and represent all those other types of cartographic elements. You know, for example, I can tell you that in here, we actually have, you know, tie hooks, so that you can actually go and put together a tie hook in here and, all right, to reflect something of that, where you've got tie hooks between here. These are not necessarily in the parcel fabric or even in the parcel data. They are purely cartographic in nature. to use to create either these digital maps or these paper maps. So you don't have to abandon all cartography in here. Just think about the issues that are associated with annotation. A, you can't read this in ArcMap, and B, serving it out on web services. If you're in an implementation, an enterprise implementation, it becomes problematic because it's extremely chatty back and forth. And so I think this is definitely a workable solution. We've used it on a couple clients and they seem to really love the way that we're doing this. You can still use it with standard types of labeling in here. For example, this is a standard label, lot label. This is a parcel label or address label, and this is a subdivision label. It still works, so that you just want to be aware that you want to use all the tools that are inside ArcGIS Pro, not keep carrying around these older ones. All right. So one more thing that we want to talk about, because while this solution is viewable on web maps, you want to be aware that since it has attribute rules on the point feature class, it has these attribute rules on here. ArcMap, that older technology, cannot read, again, not just the annotation, it cannot read any feature class that has an attribute rule associated with it. So just be aware that it might be time for us to abandon ArcMap and start moving and using some of these newer tools that are available to us. All right. So just to let you know, here is the capturing the distance code. And again, I'll leave it up there so that you can see it on YouTube. Again, it's fairly self-explanatory. This is one of those arcade scripts that you get used over and over and over again. And then here is the capture the angle code for this. All right, and I'll leave it up here so you can stop it on YouTube and you actually get copies of this and do it. If you're looking for the actual text, shoot me an email and I'll send you a copy of it. Other than that, is there any other questions on here? If not, I hope that everybody enjoyed the workshop, and I look forward to the next one. Please send us comments and send us suggestions for new recordings and new workshops. Thank you. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.